In every operating room, in every ward, in every clinic, and every team meeting, a silent battle brews. Conflict, negotiation, identity. Welcome to the Scalpel and Sword podcast, where I, Dr. Lee Sharma, physician and conflict analyst, explore the hidden negotiations beyond modern medicine. Let's trade burnout for boundaries and learn the art of healing with precision and power. Welcome, my peaceful warriors, to the Scalpel and Sword podcast. I am your host, Dr. Lee Sharma, physician and conflict analyst, and I am so excited to have on the podcast today Zej Moczydlowski, who is finishing out his third year of law school at Washington University in St. Louis. As a former combat medic, he with the United States Army Reserves. He was a special operations combat medic and sergeant first class. He has worked in Uganda, South Sudan, Congo, Central African Republic. He also was instrumental in developing COVID policy during the pandemic. He has worked several places. He has worked as an intern at the U.S. District Court of the Central District of Columbia. He most recently worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, and he is about to graduate from Washington University School of Law next month. And after this, he will be pursuing his Master of Laws degree at New York University. In addition to all of this, he is one of my daughter's dearest friends. And Zej, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Pleasure to be here. I will say, just for purposes, of the record, I worked in Central District of California for a judge, and then I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. Those were my internships while I was in law school.
Awesome. Thank you for that, because I'm getting better at reading CV Law. CV Med I can handle, but CV Law I'm still learning, so thank you.
It's a very different language, as I definitely have learned myself.
But one that I'm happily learning, which is really cool. I was telling Rachel this before we jumped on, because she just got to Huntsville. She's at a friend's wedding and was doing Fed court notes on her way down. She turned them into a podcast so she could study in the car on the way. You've had a really cool, interesting set of experiences. And I feel like one of the first ways I've learned about your experience, and I will be honest with you, it gave me a lot of insight into kind of you and also how you are in the medical world, is we're both on Snapchat and we Snapchat each other, which is awesome. And you and Rachel and a bunch of people were out one night. And this was, I think, around the time she was having more shoulder issues and she was seeing the orthopod and she had gotten MRIs. And the snap I got was, why have you not recommended your daughter to take meloxicam? Why have you not shared this with her? Why is she still taking Anaprox like it's candy? Please stop. She needs meloxicam. And the first thing that went through my head is, okay, that's awesome, because I don't want to doctor my own kid, but that's a great perspective. But the second thing that went through my head was like, that's not the first time you've had to interact with a medical professional about a treatment plan, I'm guessing.
Yeah, not by a long shot.
So where were you in your career when you first realized that I'm going to get in situations with other people who are in this world, and it's not about hierarchy, it's not about experience, it really is about the patient and who can come up with a good plan of management for the patient? Where were you when you figured that out?
So my background is a little bit different than most Army medics, because I was an infantryman, then I wound up going through the Special Operations Combat Medic course. In the Special Operations Combat Medic course, it spans all the branches: Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force a little bit less. But the idea is, when you leave that course, you're not just a regular field medic. You're expected to be able to provide prolonged field care to a patient for about 72 hours.
Wow.
And so part of the training that they put us through is to think about things a little bit more holistically and a little bit more long-term than your average paramedic, for example, would be thinking about.
Right.
And part of that training is, okay, you're going to have to think outside the box. You might have a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant, MD with you. You might not. And at the same time, when you're working with them, you need to work holistically as a team, because we're working in austere environments where you got to think outside the box. And that was a fundamental part of our training. And so that dynamic is a little bit different than what you would find in a traditional medical role, I think, because limited resources, You might not have communications to somebody higher, and you got to sometimes wing it and figure out how best to fix the situation.
Absolutely. And also, I think the approach of the team mentality, but it's a team mentality that's not, like you said, a traditional medic role where you're triaging and transporting, that you are having to do things more long term and sometimes with less. And sometimes the personnel might change. Did you ever have situations where you had physicians, NPs, whatever, that maybe there was disharmony or a lack of agreement on the team on how to manage somebody?
Not really, but one thing that was unique about our teams, I'm thinking about my deployment to Sub-Saharan Africa. I was part of what was called the Special Operations Resuscitation Team. And the way that the team was formatted was there was a doctor, an MD, who I'm still friends with the doctor who deployed with me. He wound up actually becoming a Green Beret after he
Oh, wow.
got back from that tour.
Mm.
And then we had a CCRN, and the CCRN was actually the team leader, not the
Okay.
doctor. And that was because the doctors in the military typically have a little less of the tactical and strategic experience, whereas the nurses typically come up a little bit more through the traditional officer progress. And I think that having that perspective, and because everybody on that team was kind of like, look, we're all here to get the job done. And because the senior leadership, even in those positioning, like medically speaking, the doctor would obviously have the ultimate say. But
Right.
because of that weird dynamic where the CCRN was ultimately the team leader, that actually put everybody closer together where, hey, we have this weird, austere environment situation. Our teams are formatted for this reason, that way. And honestly, everybody would be collectively working through problems. And so it would be more of a team building, not team building maybe, but like it would be a team decision typically on how to approach a situation. So
Mhm.
not a lot of discontent really on patient management. I think I saw that a little bit more during clinical rotations in civilian hospitals, but not
Right.
on my side.
That's so cool. And it's so interesting because I think, in terms of medical situations, especially those of us who are in traditional, like you said, traditional hospitals, clinics, whatever, we do tend to sometimes see more of that hierarchy, and that hierarchy leading to conflict, because you do get into situations where doctors are like, I'm right, do what I say. And it's, no, we're part of a team, all of us. We're all invested in the care of this patient. And you said something really interesting about having the CCRN lead the team. This is not just medical, this is tactical. You're actually looking at where you are, you're looking at other factors. What resources do we have? And sometimes those kind of dynamics, because in a traditional situation, if you're not really dealing with a lack of resources, or if you're not really dealing with not having things that are readily available, I think it's easier to slip into a conflict because everything else is a gimme. And when all of a sudden you have a common set of obstacles, you have to unite, you have to be together on that. And I feel like what you're describing, you definitely were doing that when you were doing special operations in Central Africa. It almost gives you less time to invest in a conflict. And I think that's an interesting observation. You saw more of that in civilian life than you saw when you were in the military. Have you had any experience working in civilian hospitals? Have you done that any?
A little bit. So the way that the Special Operations Combat Medic course works is that you do all your training at Fort Bragg at the Joint Special Operations Medical Training Compound, the JSOMTC. And after you finish your training at the JSOMTC, you do a month-long rotation in a civilian capacity. I, for example, did mine in Tampa, Florida. I did 2 weeks with Tampa Fire, and then I did 2 weeks doing clinical rotations at Bayfront Hospital and all children's hospitals. And I don't know if the SOCM program is still being hosted out of there, but if anybody from Tampa General or Tampa Fire or Bayfront happens to be listening to this, they will always have a place in my heart for giving us a place to learn.
Yeah.
But it was also very interesting there because at that point, we've only been in medicine. The medics showing up to those hospitals have only been in medicine for 6 months for me. I think 9 months nowadays is the standard. And
Right.
the hospitals treat us almost like a resident in the ED.
Mm.
We are, we're getting in there, we're intubating, we're throwing chest tubes. I did a natural delivery my second day. I assisted on 6 C-sections my first day. And this is after six
Wow.
months of medical training. And they
Yeah.
already trust us to go in and do that because they also are very familiar. All the physicians there have seen through the course and the program we go through, and they're familiar with the level of training we get. So even there, everybody is like, all right, the SOCMs are here. Half the time, they'd rather have us do an intubation than, for example, one of the residents, which was a huge compliment to us. But yes, we do get civilian experience because the other thing is one of the reasons we go to places that are typically a little bit more, I had to say it, but like a little bit more prevalence towards stuff like gunshot wounds and heavy traumas, because the next time we might see a real patient might be one of our buddies in the field in a combat zone. And so a lot of those physicians, a lot of those nurses also take us very seriously and want to give us the best training possible to make sure that if the next patient we have is an American soldier, we have the experience necessary to do what we have to do. So it was very fulfilling to work with them because they really cared about getting us the experience.
Yeah.
Then the flip side was they trusted us. I think I was end of my first week. One of the surgeons in the ED was like, hey, have you ever done a central line? I'm like, no, that's not my skill set. He's, I can coach you through it. And he walked me through doing a central line. I was like, this is so cool. And it was just that level of respect going on both sides. And the civilian side was very fantastic.
I'm so happy to hear that, especially with where you were going and what you needed to have under your belt. And I think there's something that's so cool about they invested in your training so passionately because they knew where you were going. They knew what you were going to be doing. And they also knew it's like, if you're starting to get personally, this is a patient that it's a friend of yours, it's a colleague, it's somebody who's with you, who's actually in this combat situation, that you really have to be so solid in your skill set that you can turn off your emotions and you can be professional and get it done. And that's hard. And I think that's one of those things that we forget in all of our medical educations. We had to get to a point that you could literally say, I care about what I'm doing, but I have to be professionally invested to get this done. I love it that they were so invested in your progress. And it goes back to that. We talk about the see one, do one, teach one, that process. And I think that's the way I grew up, that you see this procedure, you do the procedure on your own, and then the next time you do it, you teach it. But that's cementing that knowledge base for you. What was your favorite thing? You did a lot of things. It's like you did deliveries, you did C-sections, you're doing chest tubes. Was there one thing that you just, oh my gosh, I love doing this?
My civilian rotations were a blast. So my first day, I get into L&D and I got to assist on the C-sections, but I wanted to do a natural because I'm never going to do a C-section in the field. The reality is for us, the only reason we'd be assisting on a delivery in the field is if we're in an austere environment and perhaps we're trying to win hearts and minds and a tribal elder's daughter is having a pregnancy and we're there and they ask us to help, something like that. If we're able to help them with that and make sure that everything is delivered safely, we're seeing that we're there to help them. We're not the bad guys. And that first day, there was no natural deliveries, and it was my only day in L&D. So I was like, oh, the C-sections were cool. I didn't really get any training value out of this.
Right.
And then I told the nurses in L&D, like, hey, if there happens to be a natural that pops in over the next month, here's my cell phone number, let me know. And then literally the next day, they're like, hey, you should swing by L&D if you have a second. And so this is across the street from the ED at Bayfront over at Children's. And turns out there was a physician who had privileges at Children's, but wasn't actually an employee there. And he had a client who was coming in for a natural and had a whole birthing plan and everything. And the nurses evidently had been like, hey, we had this cool SOCM in here yesterday. He really would like to do a natural. Could he come and assist you? And I guess they vouched for me after one day. After one single day, they're like, hey, this SOCM would really like to do this. And they vouched for me. And I got to go over there, meet the patient, meet her husband, go over their birth plan. And the physician had me walk him through it 1,000,000 times about the whole process, step by step. And we had hours before the actual delivery happened because this was a planned delivery. And finally, when 10 centimeters dilated, it's go time, we're walking in. And he's like, all right, man, you're a patient. I'm just here to support you. And evidently the patient knew, everybody knew about this. And he's just like, all right, man, you're ready. Let's go. And this is all you. This is your show now. And I'm not really huge on babies. But so for me, this was really about the training, but it was really cool actually being the primary and delivering the baby, and the afterbirth, not so much. So it was absolutely a very cool experience. And the fact that after one day, the nurses had taken the initiative to get me back in there again, that just goes back to my whole thing why Children's and Bayfront always have a place in my heart, because the staff there knew he wants to do this because it might actually be a skill he needs to practice or use in the future.
Right.
And they're like, okay, how can we help him? So
Wow.
that was really cool. And I got a bunch of crazy stories from that rotation. My first
Mm-hmm.
CPR save, running around the whole place trying to chase down codes because the first person to get there out of the SOCMs got to help out. Lots of stitches, lots and lots of stitches. I felt after that rotation I had maybe a future as a seamstress. But yeah, and there was also one thing that I realized, and it's transferred over to the law field now. I have a capacity to turn stuff off, turn stuff on when I need to. Like the first time I lost a
Mm-hmm.
patient, I'll always remember that the patient's trauma code name was Trauma Juliet, and I'll always remember Trauma Juliet because it was the first time I lost a patient.
Yeah.
And for me, I was able to turn it on, turn it off, and get past it pretty quickly compared to other people. And that made me
Mm-hmm.
realize that some of the stuff I want to do in law nowadays is also some of the more intense stuff that tends to take a toll on people. And part of the reason I want to do that is because I realize I have the capacity to handle it better than some other people might be able to. So, it was a learning experience more than just the actual medical skills, but I learned about myself while I was there, which is also very cool.
Very cool. I love how you talk about medicine and the practice of medicine as something that can bridge the gap in conflict. If you had to do it, you were winning hearts and minds by if they need us to do OB, then we'll step in and do OB because that's how we build bridges. I think that's a beautiful way to look at learning skill sets in medicine. I think that's something that sometimes we forget, that we have the ability. It may not be in my wheelhouse. I may see a patient that needs something that's outside of my specialty, but I can look it up. I can make phone calls. I can find out what I can do. And if I can bridge that, then I can actually help that person. And in doing, I've maybe even strengthened their relationship with the medical community. And that's something else that I think you speak to really beautifully, is it's not just about you reaching out to help these people. It wasn't just you. It was having everybody in your training program. They valued you because you came in there, you were positive. I'm sure you were helpful. I have no doubt that you were running around labor and delivery doing anything and everything that the nurses needed you to do, which is why they called you the next day and said, hey, this guy's really cool. Come on over. Nurses don't do that unless you really jumped in there and you were being positive and helpful and doing what anybody needed you to do. That's why they had you come back the next day. I have no doubt of that. I love how you talk about that you discovered that about yourself, that there are things that you can handle that make it easier for you to handle some of these tougher things in law, which is why you are wanting to go do these things because you can. You didn't shy away from that. And that's one of the things that I think we forget in terms of going through educations. I think definitely in medical education, it is a self-discovery process as well. What can you do? What are you good at? What do you need to learn to do better? Where do you need to ask for help? We don't always do that. And I think that's sometimes where we can start to get raw with other people is because we haven't figured out some of those things about ourselves. I love how you stated that.
Yeah, I will say the point you brought up about the hearts and minds and learning and helping, the craziest thing I saw in Africa
Mhm.
was, are you familiar with Mycobacterium ulcerans,
Oh, yeah.
Buruli ulcers?
Yep.
Yeah, so the dermatological presentation of tuberculosis, and it's very rare, but the village we were in had a ton of it on young children.
Oh,
And this is just, to lay people, I explain as flesh eating bacteria. It's the easiest way to describe it. And they just didn't have the capacity to really treat it. These kids were coming in every other day to get these massive open wounds washed out with hydrogen peroxide. And you're talking about wounds that sometimes would
wow.
cover upwards of 5 to 10% of their body surface area.
Yeah.
But we were able to help them get some of the medication to start treatment earlier. And then there was one kid, his name was Frederick. I still remember my team actually
Yeah.
got a really ridiculous photo of me carrying him out of the hospital one day that they snapped of me to be like,
Oh,
hey, here's the cliche photo that you can use to impress women back in America. Because that's how we bust each other's chops when we're downrange. But our doctor, Jesse, he actually managed to get some money from, I believe, a church organization back in his hometown, back in the States. And we were able to get enough money to get, after we had treated Frederick's burly ulcer, the wound stabilized, we were actually able to pay for him and his father to get on a bus to go to the capital in Juba, where we had actually flown a couple weeks earlier to see if they had the capabilities to do a skin graft, and they did.
Oh, wow.
So we raised the money from this charity in, I believe it was Arizona, to give Frederick and his father to get them to the capital so he could actually not go through the rest of his life with the open wounds that ultimately typically led to a lot of those kids being disfigured. So that was like our big victory story for that deployment, because like we all loved Frederick, and he was a really tough kid. I want to say he was like 8 or 9, and like he was the one kid, like he would never cry out really when they were debriding the wounds every day. And so we were really happy we got to help him. Sorry, random story, but when you talked about that made me think I should talk about Frederick.
I'm so glad you did, because that's the kind of stuff, when you say you got that one story that you carry with you that you always talk about, and that made an impression on you, you were able to walk out of there, this is what I did for this kid. This kid's going to have a better life because of what we did. And sometimes we need those stories to keep us going. We need those stories to keep us invested. So no, I love it that you shared that. It's awesome.
I have a PowerPoint on it. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, no, you got to send it. Yes, you got to send that to me. That's so cool. You have so many diverse life experiences, and you are by definition in a field where you are going to, I presume, be in courtrooms and dealing with people and dealing with adversaries and figuring out ways to make things work. Do you feel like being a medic had a benefit? You talked about being able to turn things on and off, and that was part of what you're carrying into your practice of law. But is there anything else in being a combat medic that you feel like you're taking into that experience?
First thing I'll say is going from medicine to the study of law, because everybody talks about law school being so brutal and rough and stressful. And I remember my first year of law school, one of my classmates saw me at a bar before a class, just grabbing an afternoon beer. And I always just joke and say, hey, I'm Polish. It's part of my culture. I don't discriminate against you for the fact that I have a lunch beer. But he's like, how are you not stressed? Like everybody, first year of law school is brutal and everybody is stressed. And I was less stressed than most people. And my first reaction to him was, look, man, I'm not sleeping in a tent in 120-degree weather and nobody's going to die today. Mm. And I didn't think about it in that moment, what I was saying. And to people who haven't dealt with that, it sounds so morbid. And what's the worst thing that's going to happen today? I'm going to do poorly on an exam? Nobody's going to die today. Yeah. Like, that's really what it comes down to. Like, that's the worst case scenario any day you're working in medicine. What's the worst case scenario as a law student? And granted, when you get out into practice, it changes, because the worst thing that might happen is somebody who should go free goes to jail, or the opposite. That's some real circumstance and some real world stuff. But as a student, I was just like, yeah, nobody's going to die today. Why should I be all stressed out? And it's the ability to think of the bigger picture like that. Because like I said, I will always remember Trauma and Juliet, and that sucked. Yeah. But that's not going to happen while I'm in school.
That perspective definitely changed your approach to life. It changed your approach to school, but it changed your approach to life. And I'm glad you shared it with him. I'm glad that other student, because I'm sure he walked away from that and really had to think about it. And I think that's one of those things, especially, I think in medicine, we obviously, of course, are always thinking about that. But one of the things I also come back to, when we say this to medical students, even as you get into third year clinicals, you really don't ever have a reason to worry, because there's always somebody smarter than you walking around. There's always somebody who knows way more than you that you can walk up to and go, hey, this is going on and I don't know. And number one, that's how you get the patient help. Number two, that's how you learn. Because if you walk up to somebody and goes, oh yeah, do X and Y, you're going to remember that. You're going to, okay, next time I need to think about X and Y. You're still going to keep asking. And even when you get to be an attending, even when you are out there in private practice or academics or whatever, there always is somebody smarter than you can ask, always. And you have to keep that in mind. And I think that's so common for people to get in situations where they feel like I'm the final common pathway, and they get into conflict because of that. And no, you're not. You've always got someone you can ask. And I did a recording with a pediatrician before I got on this podcast with you. And one of the things that we talked about is that patients will never get mad for you saying, I don't know. No one's ever going to get mad. You say, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And then you go and find out. And then you come back. And then you have an educated answer for your patient. And guess what? They're going to really, number one, respect that you did it. They're going to respect the fact that you owned what you did know and you didn't know. But it's actually putting you in a situation where the patient's buying into what you're doing because you actually took the time to go and investigate. I think what you said to that person was brilliant because I think it's a great perspective. I'm glad you shared that. Where do you see your career in 5 years? You're on this really great precipice of graduating from WashU and about to start your Master of Laws. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
The last week and a half have been just, and I hate to use this phrase because it sounds so corny, but like an emotional roller coaster. I wanted, like, my dream job 10 years down the line is to be a prosecutor in the International Criminal Court.
Wow.
I just got published in Harvard's International Law Journal for a piece that looked at the intersection of child soldiers and culpability for sexual and gender-based violence. And I wrote on that because the case that I was looking at was actually the case of one of the warlords who my team was pursuing when we were in Africa. And so, having lived in South Sudan, Central African Republic of the Congo, seeing war-torn countries is just heartbreaking. And I would love to work on that level on the level of war crimes against humanity. And over the last year and a half here at WashU, I've been working with Professor Layla Sadat on the Crimes Against Humanity initiative, which is very fortunate. I'm proud to say that the treaty on crimes against humanity got pushed out of the legal committee at the UN. And so that's something that is very near and dear to my heart. And ultimately, I would like to find myself working on implementation of international law that protects pretty much the innocents from that type of conflict. Unfortunately, you look around the world right now between what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine. The international rule of law is not stepping up as much as it should be to prevent that type of conflict and those types of just sheer numbers of death and injuries. So that would be very full circle starting from where I was to where I want to be. But right now, my next couple of years is pretty much just trying to set myself up for that. Going to do this LLM at NYU Law, hopefully do an externship in New York, perhaps at the UN while I'm there, and then hit the ground and become a prosecutor, probably at the state level first, federal level if I get lucky, and then just keep driving on from there. Like my dream job when I was originally graduating from WashU, before I found out about the LLM, was I was going to be a prosecutor in the Bronx. And I could not have been more excited about that. Every day, law students do not have a lot of time for pleasure reading, but my pleasure reading was a book written by a sex crimes district attorney or assistant district attorney, because I was just so super excited about it.
Yeah.
And that's still what I want to wind up doing. I just couldn't turn down the opportunity to do this LLM program.
No, absolutely. You are helping so many people. You've already helped so many people, one of whom has been my daughter, because she has been very blessed to have you as a friend. That sincerely, you have definitely been a blessing to her. And I think this is such an important point. You don't have to be out of school to help people. And I think you've exhibited that. Your publications, the work that you've done, you have contributed actively to the betterment of your fellow humans by what you have done in law school. And you're going to continue to do that. And it's just really exciting to have the opportunity to hear you share these stories. I look forward very, very excitedly to see where life is going to take you. It has been a pleasure having you on the podcast. It's just been great. Thank you for being the first guy. We could not have asked for better. Great stories. Do you have a picture? Yeah, I want to see the slides of Frederick. I really want to see that.
I will absolutely send you the slideshow. Do I have time for one little anecdote real quick about the crossover?
You do, man.
This was just something hilarious that happened in a class a couple of weeks that any physician who's tuning into this is going to get a kick out of. So it's a simulation class that goes over criminal procedures. And we have a fake coroner's report for the shooting. And for the simulation, there's an expert witness that comes in, and he's an actual doctor who's playing the character who has to testify about the report he wrote. And as I'm reading through it, it's like, okay, cause of death was a tension hemothorax in the right pleural cavity, secondary to a gunshot wound. And then in the notes, the autopsy found 2,000 cc's of clotted and semi-clotted blood in the right pleural cavity, a cardiac tamponade, blah, blah, blah. And so I get to my turn to interview this physician. I'm like, wait, out of curiosity, doctor, you said that the cause of death was tension pneumothorax. And he's like, yes. And you said that there's 2,000 cc's of blood in the right pleural cavity. Yes. How many cc's of blood does it take to fill the pleural cavity? He's like, around 4,000. So I'm like, wait, so how can the cause of death be tension pneumothorax if there was still room for the lung to expand? And he just looks at me. He's like, he's staring at me like, you have some kind of medical experience. He can't ask in the middle of the simulation. But we keep going. And I'm like, so maybe it would be more accurate to put the cause of death as cardiac tamponade secondary to the gunshot wound? Yeah, that would have been more accurate. And the second the simulation is done, he just looks at me. He's like, okay, what's your background, man? Like, what's your story? And he's like, and I'm like, I'm a former special operations combat medic. He's like, okay, yeah, you've probably seen more tension pneumos than I ever will. And we just had a good laugh about it. But it was one of those crossovers of medicine and law. And I could see my professor being like, oh God, I should have known better. And it was just a really fun time. It was just one of those moments. But yeah, I'll get you the slideshow on Frederick. This was really fun. I very rarely nowadays get to talk about the medical past. Technically, I'm still in the reserves, but I'm a sergeant first class now, so I do more paperwork than anything else, unfortunately.
Wow, that is hysterical. Yeah, he was like, wait a second, dude. How do you know that?
He's like, there's no way he did that much research for this one interview. He absolutely knew something was up.
Oh, yeah. No, I love it. You know what? That is the perfect crossover story, and I'm so glad you told it. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you, Peaceful Warriors, for being with us today on Scalpel and Sword. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time you join us, be at peace. In every operating room, in every ward, in every clinic, and every team meeting, a silent battle brews. Conflict, negotiation, identity. Welcome to the Scalpel and Sword podcast, where I, Dr. Lee Sharma, physician and conflict analyst, explore the hidden negotiations beyond modern medicine. Let's trade burnout for boundaries and learn the art of healing with precision and power.